By 1944, the German war effort in Western Europe depended heavily on rail transport. Occupied France contained one of the most extensive railway networks in Europe, linking Atlantic ports, industrial regions, and military garrisons to Germany and to defensive positions along the Channel coast. German military planning assumed that rail lines would enable rapid movement of divisions in response to an Allied landing. Following the defeat of France in June 1940, the German military and the Reichsbahn took control of major rail infrastructure. French railway workers, known as cheminots, continued to operate the system under German supervision. While outwardly functional, this network became increasingly vulnerable as resistance activity expanded. From 1941 onward, organized resistance groups developed across France. Initially focused on intelligence gathering and limited sabotage, resistance activity expanded significantly as Allied preparations for a return to Western Europe accelerated. British and American intelligence organizations recognized the strategic importance of rail disruption. Their objective was not symbolic resistance, but measurable disruption of German military movement. This documentary examines the coordinated campaign of rail sabotage carried out in France during 1944. It focuses on documented incidents, operational planning, and measurable outcomes, particularly the impact on German reinforcements during and after the Allied landings in Normandy. Where interpretations are offered, they are clearly identified as such. Under pressure from Allied planners and the French government in exile, efforts were made to unify resistance organizations. This process led to the formal creation of the Forces Françaises de l'Intérieur in February 1944. The British SO played a central role in preparing resistance networks for large-scale operations. SOE files document extensive training programs conducted in Britain and North Africa, where French agents learned demolition techniques, radio operation, and clandestine logistics. These agents were then inserted into France by parachute or sea landing. The OSS operated parallel programs, particularly in southern France. OSS records indicate cooperation with both Gaullist and non-Gaullist resistance groups, focusing on sabotage and intelligence collection. French railway workers formed a critical component of the resistance effort. The cheminots possessed technical knowledge of rail systems, schedules, and vulnerabilities. Post-war French railway records and resistance reports document widespread participation by railway workers in sabotage activities, including deliberate misrouting, mechanical damage, and provision of intelligence. Historian interpretation. Historians such as Mar Defoot argue that the effectiveness of rail sabotage depended less on individual acts and more on sustained coordination between resistance groups and Allied planners. Communication between London and resistance leaders was conducted primarily through coded radio transmissions. SOE operational files show that sabotage priorities were adjusted in response to Allied strategic needs, particularly as the planned invasion of France approached. By spring 1944, resistance groups were receiving increasing quantities of explosives, small arms, and radio equipment. This escalation reflected Allied confidence that resistance forces could carry out coordinated action on a national scale. German military doctrine in occupied France relied heavily on the rapid redeployment of mobile units. Armored and motorized divisions were often stationed inland, away from the coast, to reduce vulnerability to air and naval bombardment. Rail transport was essential to this strategy. Documented fact: German railway war diaries indicate that rail movement accounted for the majority of long-distance troop and equipment transfers within France. The Reichsbahn, operating under German military authority, prioritized military traffic over civilian needs. Freight schedules were adjusted to support coastal defenses, ammunition depots, and fuel distribution. German commanders were aware of resistance activity, but initially regarded sabotage as a nuisance rather than a decisive threat. Security measures included patrols, guard detachments, and reprisals, but these measures were often insufficient to prevent widespread disruption. Railway infrastructure presented inherent vulnerabilities. Tracks, switches, signaling systems, and bridges could be damaged with relatively small amounts of explosives. Repair required specialized equipment and trained personnel, both of which were increasingly scarce by 1944. Historian interpretation. Some historians note that German planners underestimated the cumulative effect of repeated minor disruptions, focusing instead on preventing large-scale attacks. German records from early 1944 show increasing concern about rail security. Reports from military district commanders describe delays, rerouting, and congestion caused by sabotage. However, limited manpower restricted the ability to guard every section of track. As Allied air superiority increased, rail repairs became more difficult. Daytime repair work was frequently interrupted by air attacks, while night repairs faced the risk of renewed sabotage. This combination of resistance activity and Allied air pressure placed growing strain on the German transportation system, even before the Normandy landings. Rail sabotage in 1944 employed a range of methods documented in resistance reports and SO manuals. These methods were chosen for effectiveness, simplicity, and repeatability. One common technique involved placing small explosive charges on rails at points of high stress, such as curves or gradients. These charges could cause derailments without destroying long sections of track. Documented fact: French postwar tallies and Allied intelligence reports record approximately 1,800 to 2,000 successful rail sabotage incidents during 1944. Another method targeted switches and signaling equipment. Damage to these components could halt traffic or force trains to operate at reduced speed under manual control. Attacks on rolling stock were also common. Resistance groups damaged locomotives by introducing abrasives into bearings or sabotaging braking systems. These actions often caused failures far from the point of sabotage, complicating German response. Bridges were targeted selectively due to the resources required for repair. Historian interpretation. Historians emphasize that the resistance favored disruption over destruction, aiming to overload German repair capacity rather than permanently eliminate infrastructure. Coordination was critical. Resistance units often operated in small cells, reducing the risk of compromise. Communication between cells was limited, but overall priorities were communicated via radio. French railway workers played a key role in identifying targets and timing attacks to maximize disruption while minimizing civilian casualties. Their involvement is documented in FFI and SNCF post-war records. By May 1944, sabotage activity increased sharply in anticipation of the Allied landings. Resistance groups received explicit instructions to focus on routes leading to Normandy and other potential landing areas. In June 1944, rail sabotage reached its highest intensity. Allied intelligence reports estimate that over 950 derailments occurred during that month alone, with a significant concentration in the weeks surrounding D-Day. Documented fact: SOE and FFI reports confirm that sabotage operations were timed to coincide with the Allied landings on the 6th of June 1944. Rail lines connecting Paris to Normandy, Brittany, and the Loire Valley were repeatedly disrupted. German railway logs document severe congestion and delays across northern and western France. The German 7th Army, responsible for defending Normandy, reported difficulty receiving reinforcements and supplies. War diaries indicate that planned troop movements were frequently delayed or rerouted. One of the most frequently cited examples involves the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich. German records show that this division required more than 10 days to reach Normandy from southern France, far longer than pre-war planning estimates. Documented fact: delays affecting Das Reich were caused by a combination of rail sabotage, destroyed bridges, and Allied air attacks. Resistance groups also targeted lines in southern France to prevent redeployment from the Mediterranean coast. OSS records indicate significant disruption in the Rhine Valley and near Toulouse. Historian interpretation: while sabotage alone did not stop all German movements, historians agree that it significantly reduced the speed and coordination of reinforcement. German responses included emergency repair units and increased security patrols, but these measures were insufficient to restore normal operations quickly. These included armed guards on trains, patrols along tracks, and collective punishments intended to deter resistance. Documented fact: German military orders authorized reprisals against civilians in areas where sabotage occurred, a policy documented in occupation records. Despite these measures, sabotage continued. The extensive length of the rail network made comprehensive security impractical. German manpower shortages worsened as the war progressed. Repair efforts faced additional challenges. Replacement rails, locomotives, and skilled technicians were in limited supply. Allied bombing further constrained repair capacity. German railway war diaries from summer 1944 frequently note repeated damage to the same sections of track shortly after repairs were completed. Historian interpretation: historians argue that resistance sabotage exploited structural weaknesses in German logistics rather than relying on spectacular acts. German commanders increasingly turned to road transport, but fuel shortages and Allied air attacks limited this option. Motorized columns were vulnerable to strafing and bombing. By late summer 1944, the cumulative effect of sabotage, air power, and advancing Allied forces rendered large-scale rail movements in France increasingly untenable. Assessing the precise impact of resistance sabotage requires careful distinction between documented outcomes and interpretation. What can be established is that German reinforcement and supply movements were significantly disrupted during a critical period. Documented fact: Allied intelligence summaries concluded that rail sabotage materially delayed German responses to the Normandy landings. The reduced availability of armored and infantry units during the early weeks of the campaign affected German defensive capability. Units arrived piecemeal rather than in coordinated formations. Resistance reports indicate continued sabotage throughout the Normandy campaign, supporting Allied breakout operations in July and August 1944. Historian interpretation: many historians view rail sabotage as a force multiplier that enhanced the effectiveness of Allied air and ground operations. French resistance activity also provided psychological and political benefits, though these aspects are less quantifiable and not the focus of this analysis. The liberation of Paris in August 1944 further disrupted German logistics, effectively ending large-scale rail operations in northern France. The rail sabotage campaign conducted by the French resistance in 1944 represents a documented example of irregular warfare influencing conventional military operations. Through coordinated action, resistance groups disrupted a transportation system vital to German strategy. Archival records confirm thousands of sabotage incidents, hundreds of derailments, and significant reductions in rail throughput on critical routes. These disruptions delayed German reinforcements, complicated command and control, and reduced the effectiveness of defensive operations in Normandy. The campaign succeeded not through isolated acts, but through sustained, coordinated pressure supported by Allied intelligence organizations. British SOE and American OSS records demonstrate the importance of training, material support, and strategic direction. German countermeasures proved insufficient in the face of widespread resistance activity and Allied air superiority. By the time German authorities recognized the full scale of the problem, the opportunity to restore effective rail operations had passed. In historical assessment, the French resistance rail sabotage campaign contributed meaningfully to the Allied victory in Western Europe. Its significance lies in measurable outcomes rather than symbolic action. The events of 1944 demonstrate how organized civilian resistance, when integrated into broader military strategy, can affect the course of large-scale conventional warfare.